All right, fertilization, pregnancy, and birth. Okay, so last unit we talked about the menstrual cycle. So recall back to the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle, and how the ovarian cycle affected the uterine cycle. Once ovulation happened and the ovum pops out of the ovary, and the ovum pops out of the ovary, goes down into the fallopian tube. The follicle cells that had been cushioning, that had been taking care of that egg, remain in the ovary, and they turn into the corpus luteum, which makes progesterone and estrogen, and those hormones, those levels of hormones, continue the uterine walls to be engorged with blood, grow thickness, and start producing secretory glands that are going to secrete their own hormones. The ovum is in the fallopian tube. Now, if fertilization doesn't happen after 10 days, the corpus luteum dies, progesterone, estrogen levels go down, and menstruation happens. The inner lining of the uterus is gone. The ovum only lives for 24 hours. Remember when it was the primary oocyte and then the secondary oocyte, it was stealing that cytoplasm. Like every time it would divide, it would make a cell body. The division would be asymmetrical, so that would be one would be ovum, one would be a cell body, and the ovum would, during that cell division, would take all of the cytoplasm. Well, there's only enough resources in that cytoplasm to keep that ovum going for 24 hours. If fertilization doesn't happen in that time, no baby. Sperm, on the other hand, live for a whole bunch of days. They live for a lot longer. They can live, I think, up to like 10 days, something crazy. Because in semen, there's all of that. There's that citrate and there's fructose, all of those sugars. And so they got food. They take that semen, they take that food with them, and they're eating, they're happily floating around up the vagina, into the uterus. Let's go. And at the same time, there's a little bit of follicular cells that come along with the ovum, and they secrete stuff that kind of guides the sperm towards the egg. They kind of follow a concentration. Remember that acrosome in the sperm, the top of the head? It has a guidance system in there. How the ovum moves, it takes several days for the ovum to travel down the fallopian tube into the uterus. How it moves there, its fluid is basically being pushed along in the fallopian tube towards the uterus. By cilia and by those fibriae, but mainly just cilia inside the fallopian tube are sort of doing this. There's also muscles in the fallopian tube that are gently pulsing. There's a muscular level and pushing fluid along, which then takes the ovum down the fallopian tube. Because the ovum only has 24 hours and it takes several days to make it down the few centimeters of the fallopian tube, sperm have to travel up the fallopian tube against that fluid. They got to keep going and head for the ovum and fertilize the ovum way up in the fallopian tube. It doesn't happen in the uterus. It happens in the fallopian tube. And what happens during fertilization? So the top of the sperm, if you recall, the head of the sperm had that little acrosome, which is a little container basically of enzymes and that steering, that guidance system. And there's enzymes in there. And what those enzymes do is they recognize, the acrosome itself recognizes glycoproteins on the outside of the egg. And remember, glycoproteins are used for identification. So basically what those acrosome, what that acrosome is it's looking for a human egg. That's how human sperm and human egg know each other. That's why you can't have human sperm fertilized dog egg. Ew. Or horse egg. Ew. Ew. Because of those glycoproteins. So what happens, the acrosome meets the egg, it recognizes those glycoproteins. Remember those are little sugar chains, 8 to 19 monomers long. And that causes the acrosome to burst open and release hydrolytic enzymes that start to burn open the outside of the ovum. And when that happens, that also triggers the outside of the ovum to transform, those glycoproteins to transform, basically close. They go away. Slam. The doors are slammed. So no other sperm can fuse with that egg. You can only get fertilized by one sperm. So as soon as that happens, as soon as one sperm is recognized by the ovum, all the glycoproteins close their doors, basically. They all, the sugars shut down, they're gone. And the acrosome of that one sperm is activated and burns through the layer of those glycoproteins, basically the thick glycoprotein layer of the egg. And the head splits open then once it gets inside, once the sperm is in, it sort of opens the egg and dumps the nucleus into that egg, and the nucleus of the egg and the nucleus of the sperm fuse together, and that is the magic. That is what a magical thing to happen, because then a new organism is made. Wow, that is amazing. So 23 chromosomes from the egg, 23 chromosomes from the sperm come together, 46 chromosomes. And now you have a zygote, and this is called a zygote. And what happens is immediately that zygote starts to divide. Fertilized egg, zygote starts to divide. So there's the zygote. Once the sperm nucleus, haploid, ovum nucleus, haploid combined, zygote, diploid, 46 chromosomes. The zygote begins to divide immediately by mitosis. So this is, when we talk about germline mutation, so if that sperm or that egg have a mutation, a germline mutation, you have that fusion, now you have that one cell, that cell will now divide by mitosis, those germline mutations continue on. Those dividing cells will become all of the cells in the organism. Dividing, look, 2 cells, 4 cells, 8, 16, 32, on and on and on, and it becomes this thing called a blastocyst, which basically is like, an empty space inside, some cells protecting it on the outside, and a bunch of cells just sort of banging around on the inside. These cells that are banging around on the inside are called embryoblasts or stem cells, embryonic stem cells. These are the cells that scientists want to harvest. They want to steal those cells, those stem cells, and experiment on them. Because those stem cells turn into all the cells in the body. So if you can harvest those stem cells, if you can control those stem cells, what you can do is you can grow organs. You can make them, you can turn them into anything you want. We don't have the technology for all that stuff yet, and there's a ban on experimenting with embryonic stem cells, and it doesn't matter because now we know how to take stem cells, what are called the Pluto, like the stem cells in your bone marrow, and turn those into embryonic stem cells. Somebody has discovered how to do that, so it doesn't matter. We don't, but there's a lot of fear around that of evil scientists. So this blastocyst, basically, by the time the zygote reaches those few days, by the time the zygote reaches the uterus, it has grown enough to be this blastocyst. And it falls into the uterus, whee! And that endometrium of the uterus, remember in the uterine cycle, the corpus luteum has been making progesterone and has been making estrogen, which have been maintaining that that the endometrium to be vascularized and producing endocrine glands. And the blastocyst lands into this tissue, splash or bonk into this tissue, and they kind of fuse together. And when they fuse together, when they come together, they're two separate organisms, remember, or two separate genetic makeups, because the uterine wall, that endometrium is the mum, and the blastocyst is the zygote, the future child. When they fuse, they start to release, or at least the endometrium starts to release human chorionic gonadotropin or gonadotropic hormone, HCG. And when that happens, that is the official start of pregnancy. Boom. Boom. You pregnant. Notice a lot of stuff has to happen here. A lot of important things have to happen just for this to occur. So number one, that uterus has to be ready. The corpus luteum has to be working. So you got 10 days before the corpus luteum stops working. So if the zygote doesn't make it down the fallopian tube within 10 days, the endometrium is going to start entering the menstrual phase, and it's going to get washed out. It's not going to make it, and that's going to be a miscarriage, essentially. That's going to be a very early miscarriage, which happens. Important times. This first few months of pregnancy are super delicate and super important. So, blastocyst adheres to the endometrium. They start releasing human chorionic gonadotropin, which starts circling through the woman's body. This is when we can, we can detect a pregnancy, because pregnancy tests, what they do is pregnancy tests are looking for HCG. They have antibodies, like those little sticks that you pee on. They basically have antibodies that are designed to detect HCG, or they have some kind of like lining, the thing that to detect HCG. When they detect the presence of HCG, you got HCG, you pregnant, because you got a blastocyst attached to the inside of the uterus. And also what HCG does is it circulates to the ovaries. It goes to the ovaries and it tells the corpus luteum, basically it opens the door and it's like, wait, don't disintegrate. You've got to keep making progesterone and estrogen. And so the corpus luteum doesn't disintegrate and continues its job, of its endocrine job of secreting progesterone and estrogen, which will maintain that lining of the uterus and start feeding now that blastocyst, and the blastocyst can continue growing to become a fetus. Then crazy stuff happens. Okay, now well, you can see, I'll just show you. So here's the black. Look how it goes into the uterine wall. Basically, it like fuses with the uterine wall. And then some of it will become the placenta and, the umbilical cord and stuff. This is where the placenta starts. So that's why this is so vascularized, because the placenta is basically a big sack of blood where the fetus has like finger-like projections into that sack of blood with a membrane, and gases can be exchanged across that membrane, and fetal blood and mother's blood never mix, but they exchange stuff across those finger-like projections, basically, and down the umbilical cord. We studied them when we talked about the fetal circulatory system. I'm not going to go back over that. You can go look at that that stuff. But so the placenta grows out of this lining, out of this place where the two have fused. The placenta grows. Where we got? Here we go. Here's some cool placenta stuff. So there you go. There's an image of the placenta. That's the uterine lining. Big sack of blood. There's those finger-like projections. That's going to the baby. Baby's blood comes in here. Mother's blood is in here. Exchange. There's a close-up here. So this is red blood cells of the baby, capillaries of the baby that are going to the umbilical cord, and this is mother's blood. Okay? Ta-da! And so then we break up a pregnancy into trimesters. And here's all this. And basically what a trimester is, there are 3 trimesters to a pregnancy. A pregnancy is around 40 weeks. And so each trimester is about 3 months. 9 months total is a pregnancy, about. So we got fertilized egg, 1 day, 2 day, look, the baby, 1 month. After 1 month, you got a little squirmy kind of fish-like thing. The eyes are on the sides. There's the placenta developing right there. After 2 months, still kind of weird fishy thing. 3 months, not much going on. Spinal cord and stuff have formed. And this is sort of the organs have formed. And this is like a milestone, 3 months. You made it 3 months. And usually, so people don't announce that they're pregnant until 3 months, because in those first 3 months, in that first trimester, is when all the things go wrong, or when they can go wrong, and you lose the baby. Because here the organs are developing, the placenta is growing, so many important things that the fetus is still so delicate here, and it's at the whim and whimsy of all these hormones and gradients and all of these things. So this is the most likely place where things can go wrong. After 3 months, now the organs are formed. The fetus is doing more stuff on its own, like on its own. The heart, there's like not lungs, well, it's not breathing, but yeah, there are lungs, but there's proto-lungs kind of thing. And the baby's more robust, basically. The fetus is more robust. So what else we got to talk about the first trimester? For the woman in the first trimester, so implantation occurs in the first trimester, placenta develops, fetal organs develop, and hormone levels change. After about 10 weeks, once the placenta is developed, the placenta takes over the job of producing progesterone and estrogen. And as a result, finally the corpus luteum is done. The corpus luteum is released from its job. Remember, those levels and the levels of that progesterone and estrogen are maintained at such a level that they inhibit gonadotropic releasing hormone, which inhibit luteinizing hormone, which inhibit follicle stimulating hormone, which means you are not going to enter the menstrual cycle again. No other follicles will be released because FSH is being inhibited by those levels of estrogen and progesterone. So you cannot menstruate again. You cannot get pregnant while you're pregnant. Hormone levels are changing. There's adjustments. The woman's body is like, oh, I gotta make a baby. I gotta do all these things. And that leads to women being tired and nauseous. Often women are nauseous. They do a lot of vomiting. But not everybody. Not all women do this vomiting, but some do. Some feel nauseous. The second trimester, this is like the happy trimester. Everybody loves this trimester. It's a good trimester. The baby now is, the nervousness of something going wrong can be reduced because the baby, can move now. The baby's kick. You feel the baby's kick in the second trimester. It looks like there's a baby there. There's a baby bump, and you're like, for women, there's the baby's growing bigger, so it's putting pressure on the organs, more peeing. There's a little bit of back pain, maybe some constipation because it's squeezing the guts. Estrogen levels are continuing to rise. what happens is the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary will start to release prolactin, which will produce milk in the breasts. So lactation starts to happen in the second trimester. Everybody loves the second trimester. Everybody loves it. It's the best trimester. And then we get to the third trimester, which sucks again. The uterus increases by a factor of 20. It becomes huge. The uterus becomes huge. And so that leads to a lot of, like a woman's like, get this thing out of me. It becomes a huge thing. So we're looking at like week 28 to week 40. So you get more back pain, more peeing, trouble sleeping. You're carrying around this giant heavy thing, like 10 pounds. And then finally what happens, the baby gets large enough and it moves, it kind of shifts around, and its head presses on the bottom of the uterus, on the cervix. And the pressure of the baby's head pushing on the cervix sends a signal to the hypothalamus, which sends a signal then to the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin. Oxytocin gets released, and that oxytocin causes the uterus to contract. And this starts to happen sort of in the third trimester. Sometimes there are what are called like phantom contractions. These are called and they'll be just a little bit. It'll start off with just a little bit, and it might happen for a while. But then finally the pressure, is more, the stimulation is more, and more oxytocin is released, and finally you get real contractions, like, Rah! And that's where the woman's like, oh my Lord, that hurts. It's time to go. It's time to go. The baby's coming. Everybody freaks out. You pile into the car or whatever, and you drive to the hospital. And then, so the oxytocin, the squeezing of the uterus, we already talked about this in metabolic pathways, but the squeezing of the uterus puts more pressure on the cervix, which leads to more release of oxytocin, which causes more pressure on more contractions of the uterus, more pressure on the cervix, and on and on and on and on and on. Positive feedback loop, and the baby pops out. Kind of like that. And the placenta is what's called the afterbirth. The placenta follows the baby along with the umbilical cord, and the placenta comes along with the baby. Contractions still sort of continue, and it's expelled. And then you got a baby, and they're wonderful. They're pretty cool. They're ugly at first, but then they're pretty great. That is basically it for pregnancy and fertilization and pregnancy. Amazing thing. Wonderful, amazing thing. There you go. And that's it for this unit.